When my life got incredibly difficult and out of control, and I still found motivation to make a video game, I ran with it, hoping I'd learn something about game development in the process. That game was a horror game set in Markiplier's absurd universe. The project took me over 4 years, and I learned how to do things I thought I'd never do. How to make and improve digital art, how to create a scary atmosphere, how to make my own music, and how to animate in the most convolutedly silly way possible. Most importantly, I got to tell a story that only I could tell, and improved my process for creating such stories in the future. Making this game is legitimately one of the best decisions I have ever made. I improved on my depression and anxiety, and I even learned things about myself that I didn't know beforehand. But these life changes didn't happen because I made some amazing 5-star indie game. I made a lot of mistakes. So many mistakes. But the best thing you can do with mistakes is learn from them. One of my long-term goals is to create my own indie game development company, and I am more confident now that I can do that than ever before. So here is how I made my personal favorite thing that I've ever made, a janky little fan game called In the Dark. Don't forget to subscribe. For me, with any project, it always starts with the story. What I'd consider the first draft of In the Dark is actually a script I wrote for a would-be web series. I was brushing up on writing in the script format and tossing all the random plot bunnies I got after Wamaloa into one thing. But maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. See, I've written a lot of fanfics in my time. It's my favorite way to participate in fandoms. But despite this, and despite my interest in Markiplier and Morphstash as early as 2012, I couldn't figure out a story that was satisfying. I wanted to play with that sandbox, but I had no idea what kind of sandcastle to make. After Markiplier TV and a date with Markiplier, which established Markiplier's Darkiplier, I went, hey, what if Darkiplier needed to seduce and use one of the viewers because the viewers are more powerful than he is? And if he can control one, he could do more things, and then there was more plot? After Who Killed Markiplier, which established backstory for Morphstash and Darkiplier, as well as giving us more first-person perspective, and a much more serious tone that I personally ate up, I went, hey, what if a show started in first person, and then the camera, turned all the way around to go into third person and show the character, and then there was more plot? After Wamaloa, with all its glorious meta-bending and drama and confusion and emotion, I started to really like and empathize with the character Abe. And I went, what if Abe got to meet this viewer character that's being targeted by Damien, and the viewer character could hear diegetic sounds because they're connected to the real world viewer, and then there was more plot? While I was feeling inspired, I took all of the ideas I had, brainstormed a few more, and then smushed them all together, which led to the silly scripts I wrote. These scripts were super chaotic, and had a lot of what I like to call band-aids. Band-aids are basically ideas, scenes, or throwaway lines that help dissolve massive plot holes or otherwise cover your ass. They're usually done to move the plot forward, to make the plot feasible, or so that all the scenes you came up with can all fit in one story and kinda sorta make sense. For example, I had this image of Morphstash singing Crazy Train in the style of postmodern jukebox, while Abe and the viewer pulled off a heist of some kind. There were a lot of band-aids needed just to make this happen. Basically, I had Damon be like, I'm kidnapping this random person. And the viewer character being all, no, don't do that, mysterious weird man. And Damien was all, okay, but you have to bring me these 3 items within an arbitrary time frame that I just made up because I said so. Also, one of them will be auctioned off and you'll have to steal it. And then the viewer was like, okay, I'll do that now. Also, I have no memories of who I am. Bye. And then the viewer character would meet Abe at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and chaos ensued from there. This is when I first started calling this character Link, because, he's the link. He links you into the story. First drafts are usually full of band-aids, which is fine, but I'd argue that a lot of storytelling media today relies too much on these to make things work in the final draft. You ever seen a line of dialogue that's maybe kinda cool, but the context for it feels weird and forced? Or an event in a story that feels super random and makes little to no sense? Or a character dynamic that makes no sense and just feels way too forced? I'm guessing that most of these are the results of band-aids. In the first draft, band-aids help me take all of the plot bunnies and darlings that I will probably kill later, and then smush it all into one thing so that I can see what it looks like when everything's put together. From there, I can figure out what plot bunnies and darlings are good for the story, and what things are kind of good ideas on their own, but just don't quite fit the bigger picture. I can also see how the characters typically behave, get a sense of who they are, what they want, and what story is being told through them. I even look for symbolism and themes that I might have missed the first time I wrote it all, cause brain do be saying things sometimes. And from there, I start over, get the characters more fleshed out using the 3 parts rule, make character sheets based off the Fate Core system, cause I'm a nerd. Then I make a vague and loose as hell outline, story arcs for the main characters like they taught us all in English, and then I write the thing as chronologically as my attention span allows. Since I've developed everything with the themes and message in mind, the characters' desires and quirks should help me progress through the story in a way that makes sense and fits these needs. Sometimes this is when it all comes together, but it's not always so seamless. Sometimes I make the character arcs and realize characters are acting differently than I thought, so I'll need to go back and tweak the outline. Or I might find the story going in a different direction as I'm writing it, in which case I might end up redoing almost everything. It's kind of like I'm gathering all the puzzle pieces in my brain and then trying to put them together in a way that makes sense. The most consistent compliment that I've been getting from my game is that the characters feel like they are the characters from Markiplier's universe. And I am so glad because I worked so hard on the dialogue. The majority of the big scenes in the game I have written and rewritten like 3 to 5 times. So even when a plot bunny or darling scene does make it into the final product, that scene has been written and rewritten and spliced together with like different versions of the scene. The general ideas might still be there, but it rarely looks exactly the same as when I first wrote it. Because of my origins as a wannabe novelist, writing has always been my strongest skill. That said, I still made a handful of mistakes that led to the outline being way too loose, and it's super apparent in Chapter 1. I chose to do 3 chapters so I could do an Act 1, 2, 3 setup, and had an outline and story arc for the whole picture. But what I didn't do, and should have done, was treat each of the 3 chapters as their own story, with their own 3 acts, and their own outlines, and their own character arcs inside of the major one. I also only really wrote character arcs for Link and Abe and none of the other characters. I'm pretty sure this is why the writing is much flatter in Chapter 1. Plus, I still defaulted to a lot of band-aids because I was trying really hard to justify the gameplay, which has its own issues and being way too hard. And because of my history with big projects like this, I felt like I needed to finish Chapter 1 as quickly as I could. I needed to prove to myself that I could actually finish something. I've started so many projects over the years that ended up abandoned or kind of caved in on themselves, and I didn't want this to happen with my game because I knew this could be good. I wanted more stories like this, and no one else was about to make it for me, so I had to do it. Also, I wanted Senpai to finally notice me and tell me I did a good job. The fear of not finishing the game is also why I didn't hype it too much on social media. Letting myself down is one thing, but I didn't want to let anyone else down. I didn't want to fall into the trap of making impossible promises like our guy Markiplier does, and I'm happy to say that I have never ever done that. Nope, not all, not me, not this guy, not a once. So yeah, while we're here, I feel like I should mention that there's no way for me to make an Antisepticeye video without blatantly plagiarizing my buddy Vexitis. Vexitis is more familiar with Jacksepticeye lore and has several videos on the subject. So if you were hoping I'd make an anti video, I cannot recommend Vexitis enough. He's actually got a number of cool videos on his channel.
Hard at work trying to salvage what you can from broken things, I see. There you are. A sight for sore eyes indeed. It's simply thrilling to see you again. Or, for the first time, depending upon the pitiful choices you've made. I know that little mind of yours is just itching for questions. If only I, too, was blessed with such a wide burden of ignorance. Given your short attention span, I'll make this quick. Don't want to lose you before the grand finale, now do I? Follow the paths hidden as above, so below. Don't want you to be late to our date, now do we? Oh, don't tell me you've forgotten. The sands of time slip away from your mortal coil quicker than I originally anticipated. I'll make sure to fix that. See you soon, my muse.
Wait, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, my fan game! When I started putting Chapter 1 together in RPG Maker, I had the major plotline, chapter titles, and most of the tragic end figured out. But there was a lot that changed as I worked on it. In fact, after I watched Damien, I started coming up with ideas for Link that were deviating from the plan. I originally made him non-binary, and wrote him as a very bland character on purpose, to make it easier for the players to kind of project themselves into the story. I was trying to recreate how fangirls projected themselves on Bella in Twilight. I even planned to unname him Link, and let the players choose their own name for him, since it was going to be a video game. But, as I started on other aspects of the game, like the music and art and etc., I started getting this idea of Link being more of a purposeful self-insert. Like, he wouldn't literally be me, but in the part you, part someone you know, part shit you make up formula, a lot of him would be based on my experiences. Instead of the player projecting themselves onto the main character, they'd sort of be part of the main character in the same way Celine is a part of Damien. And I knew that this was my project and I could do whatever I wanted, but I didn't want things to get, like, too cringy, you know? Especially when I started playing around with the idea of Link and Abe having this are they bros or are they hoes vibe. A plotline like that with an obvious self-insert, that's literally when people start to point and laugh at you. I also didn't want the story to only serve me. I wanted it to be something relatable, and I didn't know if my experiences in life were that relatable in the Markiplier community. 6 months before I released the first chapter, I was watching Markiplier's Why I Killed Markiplier livestream. My memory isn't the best, but I do distinctly recall drawing a sketch of what Link would look like if I went the self-insert route, and listening to Mark ramble about his work on Damien. And then, at the end of that stream,
the whole overarching story is that these are stories. The world that they live in after the events of Who Killed Markiplier are that they are in stories. The detective plays out the role of whatever he needs to fill because he's the detective. Much like the actor wanted Damien to be the villain. He wants people to slot into these roles in the story and act them out and be these characters. The truth of it is, the house is just an analogy for my head. Like, this is just my imagination, and all these characters in it are characters that I've written.
This explanation was inspirational in a way that helped me round out a handful of loose aspects of the story and plot. But the biggest one was when I realized, if I went with Link being a self-insert, then the story itself could actually support the idea that he was a self-insert in a meta way. And I got this image in my head for the ending, where Link could actually address the player before he makes his big decision that leads the story to the end. And that was so cool! There was no way I could do anything else with the story anymore. It had to be this. It's a good thing I got this excited because I was going to need all the fuel I could get to survive trying to art with little skill and resources. At the time, my means of making art was GIMP with a mouse, and either scans or photos of my art. Luckily, RPG Maker has a vast community of people who are happy to share art assets, which helped me so much with the pixel art. But like, in the original script, Abe and Link meet at Fazbear's Pizza, and frankly, I didn't feel like making all the animatronics when just finalizing Abe's sprite took me like a month, at least? It wasn't even a complicated design, I didn't even have to draw hair. I started organizing and prioritizing all the things I wanted for the game. Then I focused on priority 1 type things, and only went down to 2 and 3 when Chapter 1's skeleton was complete. I already had assets for a casino and some spooky looking statues, so I just reworked them into the chapter in place of FNAF to save myself time and grueling effort. When it came to the bigger art, the busts, that was so hard. I almost gave up at one point since they're not necessary for the game to be completed, but I knew that down the line, I wanted to make games with that visual novel style of images, and skipping that was contrary to the goal of learning about that. Plus, I've loved drawing characters since I was a kid. I just never got, like, good at it. Just getting Abe to look right enough for me to consider the work sufficient took forever. It did help that at some point, I managed to scrounge up enough money to buy myself a Wacom tablet. And while it took some getting used to, since I hadn't used one in like 9 years? It did help me get everything together. There was a lot more that I wanted to do, like Abe switching from holding giant cigars to vapes, and Link nodding and shaking his head since he's supposed to be quiet, but I never got to them in time because they were lower priority. I also wanted to have a comic-like ending scene for Chapter 1, as well as a few other scenes, but I didn't have the time for that either, so the scene where Abe holds onto Link's headphones for too long just kinda happened awkwardly with no visuals because I thought the scene was cute and I was a lonely, lonely gay. I will say though that it took me 2 weeks to draw these stupid headphones for Link, and they were only used in 2 scenes for less than a minute. Why did I do that? Why do I do this to me?
Spoiler alert, I do not have these problems anymore. My awesome cousin helped me get an iPad so that I can use Procreate, and this has made the process of making art so much easier, and my skill level has, like, doubled. Pretty soon I'm gonna start posting the art that I've been making on my Ko-fi, which you do not need to pay for. Donations will be nice, but everybody will be able to see everything anyway. Giving me money just puts you in the credits of my videos. The main purpose of the Ko-fi is for me to post updates to my sequel game, The Dark Mark. So if you want to see the process behind that, link is in the description. Yay!
Then there was the coding that is in RPG Maker. RPG Maker as an engine is fairly intuitive, at least for me, and basically lets you organize all the functions you need in different types of events. I actually love it as an engine because I know I personally feel super intimidated by code. Like, my grandfather encouraged me to learn since he was into computers before they could fit in someone's living room. And I did make a very silly website about Avatar back in the day, but Kid Me was convinced that I was too stupid to learn to code properly for video games. And I've barely gotten over that now.
If you're like me and you want to make games but you're not confident in your ability to code because it's this big, ominous, nebulous, scary thing, try it anyway. Switches and variables are not going to kill you. If and else statements cannot hurt you. Okay, maybe they can a little. Familiarizing myself with the basics of the language that RPG Maker is based on helped me kind of get my head around how to use the switches and variables at all. There's dozens of free apps and videos for most coding languages out there. So even if you're using an engine that doesn't make you code, just give it 5 or 10 minutes on an app one time and see how you feel.
And of course, there's a huge community of people showing tutorials and sharing plugins that they've used for RPG Maker. It's honestly so cool to see how many people are willing to help others learn or offer ideas. The game dev community in general is just full of amazing and talented people. That being said, during Chapter 1, I was irrationally terrified of plugins. I was worried I would break my game, or RPG Maker itself, irrecoverably if I did it wrong, so I didn't use any until Chapter 2. Like I said, irrational fear. Like, considering my mental health at the time, it's incredible that I had the guts to post this online at all. RPG Maker has these events called common events, where you can basically have an event made and then summon it up at any point. The name common event is because their purpose is for events that repeatedly come up again and again. I also used them for cutscenes with a lot of dialogue, so I wouldn't spend eons trying to hunt down which event I stuck them in. Plus I could work on scenes that I was ready to make, but not ready to implement in the game. I started out just playing the game from save points to see if the edits I made worked or not, but this ended up taking so much time. I ended up making a map specifically for testing common events and ideas I had. Highly recommend doing this. One of the biggest time sinks and experiments I did for the entire game was my system for the character expressions. I was watching a lot of YouTube videos about games at the time, and I was inspired by a video made by Extra Credits where... Oh. The video's privated? What? Oh, they're, well... You know what, that's fine, I've already moved on to Game Maker's Toolkit, whatever. Anyway, they were explaining some of the problems with Andromeda's animation on release, and explained how dialogue systems in the game typically work. And it gave me this idea where I could draw the 7 expressions for each character, split them up by their eyes, eyebrows, and mouth, and then put them together on different image layers in RPG Maker. Then I could mix and match them to get an expression that fits the dialogue better than just the same angry image or same sad image every time they are sad or angry. It occurred to me that instead of layers, I could just make a bunch of images with each of these variances and then pick the one that looks right, but, okay, so the first game I ever made had issues because the size of the images made the game too big to upload on itch.io, so to save space and keep the game from getting too big, I did the layers anyway. And oh my god, that was not a wise decision. I didn't just use the image layers for the busts, I used them for a lot of different things. So even though I organized the images in a way that was easy to find them and had a neutral template for each character so I could just copy and paste and tweak them, I constantly had to mess with the layer order to get around other images from other events. And while RPG Maker lets you use pretty much infinite layers, it wasn't exactly built to do like 10 layers of moving images on top of each other. And there's frequent delays as the engine tries to find and pull up all these images at once. I was too anxious to go on a forum and ask for help with this directly, but I did figure out one strategy around this issue. I noticed that RPG Maker had an easier time loading images that had already been loaded recently. And you could set the opacity on images to 0, which makes them invisible. So when a delay was super obvious and the timing was important, and I remembered to implement the strategy, I would preload the images by having them come up before they were needed, but invisible. Then I just made them visible at the correct time. And it worked!
It's a surprise tool that can help us later.
This was still a hassle and a half for me though. I love the idea of having dynamic expressions in this way, but organizing the code became 5 times harder than necessary, and I was always just one small oversight away from having Abe's eyebrows floating in the air or Link's hair vanishing and completely breaking the immersion. So while I want to keep parts of the system in future games, I'll probably make it easier on myself and just have all the different expressions on one image, or something to that effect. One idea I had that saved my ass so much time and confusion was creating the variable called storyprog. A lot of the behaviors and statuses of events would depend on what part of the story the players got into. Usually one would mainly just use switches, but this got confusing at times when I needed to switch to affect a whole bunch of events at once. So I also started using storyprog as a way for me to go, okay, after Link does X, all things affected by X will switch to Y mode. Basically. I mainly ended up using this corkboard to help me keep track of what number storyprog was at different stages of the story, but I also used it for other stuff too. So many notes, so much organization, so much me making my room look like an alternate version of Abe's office.
I've tried to fix some of the mechanical problems with Chapter 1, but to this day, whenever I look at those events and variables and things that I did not label clearly and did not leave comments to explain certain things, it just makes my brain turn into a pile of goo to look at it. So keeping things organized and readable for your future self is a big priority when it comes to any kind of like coding or eventing things. I was able to fix a couple of things though, like I wasn't super direct in what the player had to do, so I added a few hints and nudges in that direction. But if all else fails, I made walkthroughs for every chapter. Back in my day, we kids all had to use walkthroughs in order to get through our favorite janky games, so you guys are spoiled. It was expected for games to be stupid hard, so I'm not wrong. I am so sorry.
Last but hardly least, there was the music. I was already pretty familiar with Kevin MacLeod's work from past projects, but I wanted to find something that didn't feel overused, something unique and fitting the tone of the game. I found a really cool and creepy song made by Bugden called Welcome to Chaos, and listening to it gave me an image in my head of a cool animated sequence I could do at the end of the story. So I started playing the first half of it at creepy parts in the game as a way of building up to that scene. RPG Maker has this function where it can slow down or speed up music as much as 50%, which can come in handy if you want to reuse a certain song or theme, but have it fit a different scene's tone, or to just keep the audience from dying of repetition. I especially was looking for a theme song for the game itself, something that my brain could forever associate with the game in a way that reminds me of what I'm going for and what I love about my project. Myuu has a lot of really good copyright-free music that fits the horror genre, or at least has a melodramatic tinge to it. He makes some of my favorite free-to-use songs. I found myself drawn to Identity Crisis. Not only was it good, but the title fit Link in a way that I thought was super cute, but I wasn't sure if the song itself fit, until I brought the speed down by 50% and got this. It fits so well. But there was also an idea I wanted to implement that actually led to me making my own music. Everyone knows the song that never ends, right? It's one of those kid songs as universal as Itsy Bitsy Spider, or Baby Shark, I guess. Mark's discussions on the lore often focused on how these characters are stuck having to exist in the universe forever, how people would have to deal with their wounds forever. Not to mention the plotline I had with Markiplier and his own insistence on forever. I thought the song that never ends would be a really cool, creepy song to include. Except I couldn't find a free-to-use version of the song! I had this Android app at the time that let me play and record MIDI piano music, and you could set it to a mode where it would play music box notes instead. I didn't discover Soundtrap until I was working on Chapter 2, but I don't think I would have looked for something like Soundtrap if I hadn't been driven to make this. Oh my god, this video is already so long. I'm gonna break it up into different parts now. Bye!